So now we're going to move on to the auditory system. So how hearing works is it involves sound waves, which are vibrations in the air that the auditory system catches, and therefore you hear noise from it. So if you think of the phrase or the question, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there, does anybody hear it? Well, when the tree falls, it will still make the sound waves. So the sound waves are still existing. The problem is if there's no ear to interpret the sound waves, is there actually a sound? We perceive three things. There's pitch, which is a high pitch and a low pitch, where this is a low pitch, and this is a high pitch. And that is based on the frequency of the waves. Then you have loudness, which is obvious, but this is when you're talking louder, and this is when you're talking softer. And then you have timbre. Timbre is the ability to recognize different types of voices. So, for example, you can tell your mother's voice different from a friend's voice. You can recognize the differences. That's based on the timbre. So what happens when you have the sound waves? First, the waves strike the eardrums and they vibrate, one eardrum. Then, after it strikes that eardrum, you're going to get these tiny, tiny bones that pick up the vibration. So it almost looks like there's an anvil and a stirrup, and they transmit the information to the cochlea. Now the cochlea is a little coiled filled tube in the inner ear. It kind of looks like the seashell shape. You get ripples in the fluid of the cochlea, and within that cochlea are the hair cells. So when you get these ripples, it moves the hair cells, and that's what triggers impulses to your nerve cells, which are at the end of the hair cell. From there, the nerve cells will then transmit the signal to your auditory cortex, which hopefully you remember is in the temporal lobe. Now, here's a diagram of what this looks like. So you have the sound waves, and then here are the bones in the middle. So if you look specifically here, you have the drum and the hammer and the anvil. And my favorite is the stirrup because, you know, the name is very suiting. And then, so it hits on that, which continues to hit and make noise. So here is the oval window for the cochlea. And this is where the hair cells are. And you'll remember they brought this up when we were doing that auditory exercise. So as you get older, this is the part that changes, the hair cells. They get weaker, and that's why you're not able to hear such high frequencies anymore. Now, the stirrup is going to move the liquid, and that's what wiggles the hair cells. And then, of course, it moves to the auditory cortex of the temporal lobe. So there's two theories about hearing that we're going to discuss. The first theory is called place theory. And this is argued that there's a pitch or frequency that occurs because of the basilar membrane in your ear. So basically, when you hear something, it's gonna depend on where in the basilar membrane is activated the most. That will tell you how high the pitch is. So when it's near the oval window, then you're gonna hear a higher sound. And then when it's far away from that oval window, in other words, it's getting more in the coil, you hear a lower sound. So the fact that you hear these different pitches has to do with where the membrane is getting stimulated the most. So while this theory was good, it actually didn't explain very low frequency sounds. So it's not explaining everything about hearing. So then a second theory was developed, and it's not contradicting the first one, but they're used in tandem. And this theory is the frequency theory. This one talks about how pitch is actually related also to the frequency to which the nerves fire. So if you have a high pitch, then you're getting more firing of those nerves in the ear of the cochlea, and the more they're fired, the higher you hear a frequency. And then if you have a low pitch, that's because the auditory nerves are actually firing less. So then your brain interprets it as a lower pitch. So one argument for tinnitus, or tinnitus, I never say that correctly, tinnitus, is, for those of you who don't know, that is when you start to hear a very high-pitched sound that doesn't go away. It's most commonly related to age, so maybe your grandparents have that experience where they complain about always hearing a high frequency. And that can be caused, well, there's many causes, but one reason is the auditory nerves in the ear are firing too much. So even though there isn't a sound wave that's causing those nerves to fire, they're going off, and their brain is still interpreting it as a high-pitched sound. So the idea with the frequency theory is that you have these neurons firing in a volley pattern. So the more they're firing back and forth, the faster they go, the higher the pitch. And they trade off with each other, hence it be calling a volley. It's very similar to volleyball, where you volley back and forth at the net. That's the idea, is that they're going back and forth. Now, the low-pitched sounds are best explained by the frequency theory, and the high-pitched sounds are best explained by the combination of both. So if you go back, remember it's the frequency theory that has that volley argument. So for a low-pitched sound, because the placement itself does not explain such a low pitch, it also shows that it's really the low pattern of activation that is telling you how low that pitch is. Whereas the high pitch, you're noticing more volleying occurring of the cells, and you're noticing the activation closer to that oval window. So I'm going to skip this first demonstration because we talked about it in class, and basically it's showing that as you age, you can't hear as well the high-pitched frequencies. But the second demonstration I want to show you is actually an auditory illusion. So usually we see visual illusions, but you can look up different auditory illusions. And this is an interesting that has to do with a combination of how you visually expect a sound to sound when you see it versus when you just hear it.
Many of us have become quick to catch illusions that trick our eyes, but how often do you consider illusions of the ear? Are you really able to trust your ears and the things they hear? For example, listen to Greg speaking. Bar, 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 bar. What do you hear? If you heard bar, 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 you'd be right. But how about now? Bar, 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 bar. Chances are you heard far, far, far this time with an F, except you didn't. In fact, the audio didn't even change between the two videos. Bar, bar, bar. Strange as it may seem, what you hear depends on which video you're looking at. Go ahead, take turns watching each video and see how the sound morphs. Bar, bar, bar. This is a perfect example of something called the McGurk effect, which shows how our visuals can alter what we believe we're hearing. Now I want you to count how many times you see a circle flash on screen. Let's do that one more time. Did you see it flash twice? Many people do, yet without the sound, it becomes clear that the circle is only flashing once. In this case, the sound has altered your perceived vision. The next one works best with other people around. I'll play two tones, and you tell me if they're ascending or descending. In other words, are the notes played from low to high or high to low? Listen to this. Which was it? How about this one? Write down what you heard for each number and let us know in the comments. Chances are, if you compare with enough people, you'll all have different answers. Surprising? Try some more. And this one. How is it possible that you're hearing something different from others? It's an auditory illusion called the tritone paradox. It's created in such a way that the tones contain both a higher and lower frequency in them, but our brains have a preference of which to listen to. Diana Deutsch, the creator of this illusion, found that your geography and language from infancy all play a role in deciding this preference. Finally, listen to this audio clip of a gradually climbing tune. And And yet, if I play the exact same clip back to you, it will sound like it's only continuing to climb higher and higher. I swear this is the exact same clip I just played. You can rewind that section of this video over and over and check for yourself. Try it. Each time you start it over, the tune is seemingly climbing even higher. It's called the Shepard tone illusion, of which there are many variations. In it, multiple sine waves are played on top of one another, raising in pitch, while one quickly drops down an octave as the others continue rising. But our brain doesn't notice this drop, and so the clips sound like they're rising forever. These illusions may help to explain how something like music can have such a profound yet varying effect on our minds, which we discuss in our New ASAP Thought episode here, along with the question of whether or not music can save your life. There's a link in the description to watch it. So, do you still trust your ears? Got a burning question you want answered? Ask it in the comments or on Facebook and Twitter. And if you want the inside scoop on upcoming episode ideas and behind the scenes, check out our personal Instagram and Twitter handles. And subscribe for more weekly science videos.
Alright, so that was a good example of some auditory illusions. Now let's look at other senses. Skin senses, obviously we have with the touch. So touch is based on the pressure against the skin. And there's also temperature, which has to do with thermoreceptors in your skin that recognize warm and cold. Another sense is pain. So the pain sensation is interesting because it's actually in the brain more than in the skin. But it's obviously one of our most adaptive senses because it warns us of any damage to the body. And in fact, there's some illnesses where some people actually can't feel their skin and they can't feel the pain, and it's a very dangerous condition because they will end up walking around with a broken leg or a broken ankle and they won't even recognize it. So it's very difficult to have that type of condition. They really have to check themselves frequently because they cannot tell when something's wrong. There are also individual differences in pain, not based on research, but as a ginger, I sometimes get, those little blogs about how gingers work. And it does have to do with a deficiency in the chromosome, but there is a lot of argument how when you have red hair, you're more likely to have a lower pain threshold. So you feel more pain, and also it takes more anesthesia to work, which is something I personally experienced going to the dentist my entire life, and the dentist would never believe me when I kept saying I need more anesthesia, and then I would always feel it. But that is something that I recognized on my own. And then finally, it was, I think in the 1990s that they actually did research to show that gingers do need more anesthesia. So now when I go to a new dentist, I literally bring that journal article with me because they still will not believe me when I'm like, hey, give me more of that anesthesia. But like I said, the experience of pain is generated in the brain, not actually at the site of an injury. An interesting thing that we've discussed in the past is this phantom limb pain. So a person who has an arm or a leg removed can sometimes feel the pain in the missing limb. And we've talked about this before, where from the perspective of the brain, and how when you're not using that area of the brain, if you're activating neighboring areas, it might jump over a little bit. That could be causing that phantom limb pain. And so we talked about how one way of helping with that pain is to put a mirror there and have the person recognize the other limb, and that can actually help with the pain. But here's an interesting video that shows a demonstration of how our perception of our connection to our body can actually influence our own beliefs of our senses of touch.
Welcome to the rubber hand experience. Put your left hand right here and put your right hand right here.
Jonah has participants hide their right hand out of sight behind a divider,
Just gonna drape this as if it's your real.
while he places a rubber hand on the table in front of them.
Just stare at this hand.
Jonah primes participants by brushing both the fake and real hand simultaneously. A process which helps the brain link the feeling to